Hey guys, welcome back to the Dillon England Show. I am so excited to introduce this guest. This guest is one that I actually grew up with. Paul Kalmbach, who's the owner of Kalmbach Feeds. Kalmbach Feeds is a nationwide leader in animal nutrition. They have over 1,000 employees. It's a massively successful company, and I grew up with his kids. So getting Paul on the podcast was something that I knew I wanted to do from the very beginning. Unbelievably successful in business. He's so wise and has so much experience. This conversation was probably one of the favorite conversations I ever had. It all started with a $20,000 loan and a dream because Paul's father is the one that started this company. And now Kalmbach Feeds has just grown to be really just a nationwide leader in the industry, and they're not stopping anytime soon. And if you want to hear how persistency, leadership, and unwavering values can build something truly lasting, this is an episode I know you're going to really enjoy.
Break through the barriers. You got to smash the walls. There's going to be times in our entrepreneurial journeys where there's going to be a really big wall. You've got to figure out how to smash through that, and people do that over and over and over again.
I really respect Paul Kalmbach. I know that this conversation is going to be a big blessing to you. So please grab some coffee. If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road, but enjoy this episode of the Dillon England Show with Paul Kalmbach. I appreciate you coming on the show, Paul. Like I said towards the beginning, we've known each other for a while, but your story with Kalmbach Feeds is one that, like, I know some, but I don't know all. And a lot of my listeners are young entrepreneurs. So a lot of them are like 18 to 30. Maybe they don't have a business now, but they're thinking of starting a business. They love business conversations. And so what I wanted to start with today is I wanted to hear kind of your story from taking Kalmbach Feeds from your dad, taking it to another level. Now you pass it on to your son. And it's been a really cool thing, but I'd love if you could give us a quick, what is Kalmbach Feeds? Maybe the history of Kalmbach Feeds, a little bit of when your dad started it, why, and he did start it. Milton did start it, correct, right?
Correct.
And then maybe just walk us through a little bit of the history, and then we can just kind of go see where our conversation takes us from there.
Well, you know, I always tell folks, and I mean it very sincerely, that I didn't turn out half as good as I should have because I had fantastic parents. And my dad's story is a typical Horatio Alger story in the fact that I would call it a God thing. My dad, I always said my dad should have been in prison. And you say that, why is that? And I said, well, he was a fatherless child from the inner city. And in fact, when I look at my dad's story, what I learned from my dad's story, anything is possible in America. Anything is possible. His dad died when he was very young in the middle of the Depression. He was the youngest of 9 children. His oldest brother was 22 years older, and his oldest brother took over the family practice of plumbing. Okay. My grandfather had come over from Germany. So my dad always wanted to be involved in agriculture. His mother did everything she could to discourage it. Because what does an inner city kid have to do? This is
nothing so far away. Yeah.
So, yeah, right. Yeah. So, but to make a long story short, he worked really hard. He paid his way through Penn State in agriculture, and while I was at Penn State, he made the most important decision of his life, and that was to marry my mom. He married my mom. They went on a honeymoon on a Greyhound bus to New York City. When they got back from New York City, he had a draft notice. Now, he had 2 deferments. He had a deferment for being in college and a deferment for being married now. And he went to the local draft board and said, well, you guys made a mistake. And they said, well, you can either go to prison or you can go to Korea, your choice. So he spent the first 2 years of his marriage in Korea. It was funny because I always asked my mom, I said, Mom, you must have felt terrible about that. You know? Yeah. And my mom, in typical mom fashion, she said, Paul, it was way worse for the World War II women because they didn't know when their husbands were coming back.
Yeah.
And so,
it's true.
That's my mom. Anyway, my dad came back. He got his degree. He worked some, and then he went on the GI Bill to the University of Connecticut for his graduate work. And then you can't make this stuff up. A co-op from Ohio hires this East Coast city kid to be their only nutritionist. So we make our way to Fostoria, and my dad goes to work for Ohio Farmers Co-op as their only nutritionist, and he had lots of ideas on how they could improve. They weren't interested in most of them, and so he decided he had to get started in business. He went out and got a small business administration loan.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they published the award in the Columbus Dispatch, and my dad's boss did not think that was consistent with his career with Ohio Farmers, and he got fired on Monday.
Fun.
And that wouldn't have been a problem, but a short time thereafter, he got a letter from the Small Business Administration telling him that they'd run out of money and wouldn't be able to fund his loan. And I always say, now I don't know this for a fact, but I always say that was the day my dad went from being a New Deal Democrat to being a conservative Republican like his wife. Which he was.
When the government did not come
I know
through
that
for him.
from the rest of his life, that's what he was. And anyway, people talk about stories. I'll never forget. My parents did not fight much. I mean, they had a phenomenal marriage, but they had one really big knockout fight when my dad told my mom that he wanted to start his own business. And it was like, where are you going to get the money? Why do you think you're going to be successful? My mom had put him through last half of undergrad and grad school, and now she had a home in a nice community with lots of friends, and he was going to uproot her into this thing. My grandfather, my mother's father, wrote my dad a great letter. He had an 8th grade education. He wrote him a great letter about how he was trying to go into a capital-intensive business with all this big competition, with well-funded. How did he think he could make it? But my dad was able to get a $20,000 loan from a local bank. I'm sorry, I should go back to finish that story. So my dad and mom had this fight.
Yeah.
And my dad retreats to the cellar because it wasn't a basement, it was a cellar. And I never forget, as a 7-year-old, I walked down those steps to my dad. I put my hand on my dad's shoulder and said, "Dad, I'll loan you some money." And my dad turned around, and this is when I got it. He says, "Paul, I need to borrow all of your money." And I had $103.57, and he borrowed it all. Paid it back, I might add, with lots of other benefits. But that was the start of Kalmbach Feeds in 1963. And there was always challenges, always lots of issues and challenges. But really, God blessed the business. My dad was an incredible hard worker. And despite many mistakes and failures, we've been very fortunate. We've grown the business 10% per year for over 60 years. It's really an unbelievable run. We've got great team members and great customers today.
Why feed? Why? When
because he was an animal nutritionist.
Gotcha.
So he worked for Ohio Farmers as a nutritionist for them. He saw all sorts of opportunities on how he could make a better product and better serve the customer with a better value, and that's why feed.
Huh. And then at what point growing up? Well, first of all, I got to say, as a father, and I have a daughter now, like I can only imagine. I'm surprised he just didn't break down crying when you offered him that money, because that was probably one of the sweetest offerings that that a father could ever ask, for a son to be in on your side and trying to help you out. I mean, that was. Yeah,
I don't think my dad was more of the World War II thing.
Yeah.
Those guys didn't break down and cry.
No.
At all.
Yeah.
But
it probably meant the world to him that you were willing to help out.
I'm sure it did as a father also. When I think about my parents, that was a tough time. I mean, my mom ran the office from 63 till 97. And she had when I came back from college, she went out and bought a college textbook and taught herself accounting.
Wow.
That's how we did the account. And she was outstanding.
Wow.
That was my mom.
At what point did you show an interest in this? Since that point, were you always kind of interested in the business, or?
Well, I always say, my mom was involved in the business from day one. My dad was, and we ate as a family as often as we could. My dad was traveling a lot because he was involved in sales, and all they talked about was business and a little bit of politics.
Right.
Okay?
Sure.
And so it's amazing. I knew everything about the business. And I didn't know if I was going to come back to the business at that time, but I was interested in the business and I knew everything about it. And from that table. And it's interesting because I know, is it a coincidence that all three of my children are interested in businesses and entrepreneurialism? I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they sat around the table, same table, and we talked a lot about the business. And I would say, I came back in 1979, August of 79. Most of your listeners weren't born then. But in November of 79, there essentially was a crash in the ag markets. Everything crashed. And then we went into the worst time since the Great Depression. And in fact, Congress passed a new bankruptcy law, Chapter 12, to help farmers. It was so bad.
So you came back from college? Did you come back from college? Or when did you come back?
I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so then I actually got an undergraduate degree in engineering. And then I spent a year in Papua New Guinea with the Lutheran Church in missions work. And then I came back. And when I came back, I thought I'd probably go to work for my dad. Okay. And so I went to Ohio State, and which for the second time, and got a master's degree in ag economics, and I took all the nutrition courses. And then I came back to work for my dad in the fall of 79.
Okay.
And the other thing is there's always difficulty in businesses. It's never easy street. In 1975, in February of 75, my dad had a debilitating stroke. And most people would have died. The ones that didn't die, 99 out of 100 would have been retired and out of the work. He fought and fought and fought. Came back. My mom ran the business till he got back into the business. But from 75 to 79, the business didn't grow. We averaged 10% growth over the last 60 years, but those 4 years were the business.
You're just trying to keep it alive. Keep it afloat.
They kept it going where it was at. And so when I came back in 79, then we were able to start growing it again.
Gotcha. And then at what point did your kids, because I know now, it's been a generational thing. Was it always the plan for you to hand it off to the kids, or were you just up to them on what they wanted to do? Or
I think for anybody who thinks that's the plan, first of all, one human being, whether they're their father or not, can't plan for the son.
Yeah.
The thing that they do is prideful and erroneous. So obviously, I wanted our children to pursue what God had for them to pursue. In Paul's situation, Paul and I, we always got along well. And so there was never an issue that way. And we always thought a lot alike. And what happened in his, he of course, he went to Bob Jones, got his CPA, worked for Ernst & Young. And then he said to me, he said, Dad, I want to go to Harvard. Will you help me? And I had a friend who taught at Harvard. And she told me that if he wanted to go to Harvard, obviously in addition to having really good grades and test scores, he needed to come back and work for me because, as I put it, when you're a CPA at a Big Four accounting firm, what you are really is a referee. And Paul didn't want to be a referee. He wanted to play the game. And Harvard gets that too. And so she said he needed to come back and work for me. So he came back and worked for me for a year. And in that year, I think he saw the business, and he really developed a real interest in the business. And of course, what I saw is he had what it took. There's no question. So then he goes off to Harvard. Well, he's not going to go to Harvard and then say ahead of time what he's going to do. He went to Harvard. He worked for Bain Consulting a little bit, which is a big 3 consulting firm worldwide. And then, he said, well, Dad, maybe we should talk. And he says, what's going on? And then I showed him what was happening in our business. And we had a lot of things happening. I mean, we were still growing 10% plus a year. We were into some new businesses. We had all sorts of good things happening. Our retail business was growing 20 plus% a year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, man, I think I want to come back. And so we worked on a plan to get him back, and he came back, and that, it's worked really well.
That's awesome. I wanted to throw it back to when you started taking over. A lot of times when I have entrepreneurs on, I love kind of just gleaning lessons from them and lessons you've learned. And sometimes people learn more by failing than by your successes. When you look back over your career of building Kalmbach Feeds, helping your dad take it to the next level, growing it for a while, handing it off to Paul Jr., what are some of the lessons that you've learned in your life of entrepreneurship, running a company? And I guess this would maybe be a good spot to, as much as you're willing to divulge into how big Kalmbach Feeds is, the team, whatever you're allowed to share. I know that you don't want to whatever, but just just so my listeners just have a small concept of the company that the Lord has allowed you guys to build.
I appreciate your sensitivity to that issue. I want to tell the story I told you earlier, and that is, when I came back to work for my dad, first thing he did on the first day, he gave me a stack of farm magazines, and he said, read these. And so I went back to my office for about an hour and a half. I perused them. Then I went back to my dad's office. When I went in the office, he says, well, what'd you learn? And I said, well, what did you want me to learn, Dad? And he says, well, did you notice the magazine covers? And I said, yeah. He said, well, did you notice that everybody on those magazine covers is bankrupt? Stay off of magazine covers. And what he's really saying is from Proverbs, pride cometh before fall. And it's a really good lesson. And so we've always said, one of the Paulisms at work is the only people we care about who knows about Kalmbach are our customers and our soon-to-be customers. And as we've grown, obviously, we have a need for a larger presence in the marketing, particularly as we developed more and more and more great consumer products. So we still think of ourselves as a small company. We still, I think, make decisions quickly and as a small company. We have a fantastic culture. We have 4 values, and the first value that we have is treat other people the way you want to be treated, and that's the standard. And I think we certainly do a great job of attempting to achieve that, and we do as good a job as humanly possible in that. And we've got fantastic team members. But right now, we're involved in a lot of businesses that people don't know we're involved in. We just soon keep it that way.
I love it.
But at Kalmbach Feeds, we have over 1,000 team members. We sell in all across North America. We have plants in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Mississippi and Texas. So we've got a geographic reach also that would be consistent with growing 10% a year for 60 years.
And I appreciate you answering that in the best way you can. I know it's always kind of a weird question when I ask business owners to give some sort of number, and that's helpful. I mean, praise the Lord, you guys have been able to build this company. And one thing I've heard from, I know I have some friends that work at Kalmbach is, and even when talking to my dad, the word culture is always a word that comes up when talking about your company, is the way that you did your culture. I was actually talking to my dad, and maybe you could expound on this, but he said that you have like a counselor for people or someone that people can go to if they would have questions. I think that speaks to your culture. Would you mind maybe sharing? I don't know if
we have coaches. And when we introduced this to our team, who gets the most coaching? The professional athletes get the most coaching. They get coached every day for as long as they want to be coached, and probably longer sometimes. Yeah, they get the most coaching, and they're the best in the world. And so the idea of coaching, and I noticed this even when I was at Ohio State, I was a tutor for 1 year. And most of the people that came in were getting B's and wanted to get A's. It wasn't people came in and volunteered because they were getting D's and wanted to somehow pass. Sure. Those people wanted to know what major to change into. Right. And so all of us need coaching. And so, as our culture has changed and there's been a breakdown in the family and other issues, there's lots of problems in folks' lives, and we can all use coaches. I need a coach. Yeah. And so we've hired a couple of coaches to coach our team members that desire it. And, you know, it's the one area of the company that I always say I don't have any accountability because I don't know what they do. But they all tell me that they're busy, and they tell me that it is very, very rewarding work, and I trust them. And we care about our people. And I would say that one of my failures has been I have not done as much serving our team members as I should have to the honor and glory of God.
What would you have done different?
Well, I would have had.
From the outside in, it sounds like you're doing a lot.
No. I would have had coaches a lot sooner, and I think there's lots more we could do. So, for example, I was just at last week. I was at Hobby Lobby with David Green.
Okay,
and I listened to his testimony, and I got to share this. He was the son of a preacher. Had 6 siblings.
Okay.
And as his career advanced, and he was working for retail operations, and he'd get advanced to area manager and general manager and vice president, he would tell his mother that he'd got an advancement, and she would always say, "What are you doing for the Lord?" Great question.
Yeah.
And that's David Green's background.
Okay.
And right now they're giving 50% of their profits to the Lord.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
And they've continued to grow a fantastic retail organization. And so, I learned a lot from him.
I mean, first of all, that's incredible. I think, even when we talk about tithing, 10% feels like a lot sometimes. And then it's cool to see people say like money doesn't necessarily change you. It shows who you are. And so then to have someone that God has blessed them with wealth and it hasn't destroyed their life and they've been able to give, it was a really cool thing. And you said Dave Green, right?
Yeah, David Green.
That's awesome. So back to the culture conversation with Kalmbach. Are you familiar with EOS at all? It stands for Entrepreneur Operating System.
No.
So it's something that's helped change my business. It basically, there's core tenets that you go through. You talk about your vision, your traction, and why you're doing what you're doing. And it's a leadership training for leaders to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because when you have multiple departments and it's easy to everyone have their own opinions and it not be aligned. And so EOS is just kind of like a system of thought that allows everyone to kind of be on the same page. But one of the things that's constantly talked about is culture. And I have to ask, from someone who helps, I know Paul Jr. is in charge now, but I think you're on the board or you're still involved with Kalmbach.
I'm CEO.
Oh, you're still CEO?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I didn't want to say something wrong. So for someone who's a CEO of a large company, to me, I have one employee that I pay on payroll. And then I have 6 other agents that work for my agency that are commissioned with me. What's the most important culture? Like if I was going to focus on 1 or 2 things that I'm like, if you could just start small, how do you start building a culture that people want to work for you for? Like where do you start on that culture?
I would say that the first thing you got to do is you got to have the right culture. And so in our case, I really, we've been doing this for 35 years. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. Every team meeting we talk about it, and I say our success is going to be directly proportional to the way we implement and execute on value number 1, treat other people the way you want to be treated. And those other people include our fellow team members, our customers, our suppliers, and our community. And then you have to live it.
Yeah.
You have to live it. And there's lots of challenges. And, so if you have somebody that you have to terminate, how do you live that culture through that? And you want to think through that. So you have to communicate the value, you have to have the right value, and you got to live it.
And I think what you said was you have a very clear, like, this is what we do and this is how we run. You treat other people the way you want to be treated. It's very clear. People aren't confused by that statement. And then you're consistent with it. And I'm sure when you see people not doing that, it's very easy to see them not doing that because since it's a very clear direction. maybe not.
I mean, obviously, some people don't do it when you're not looking, and you have all sorts of issues. But I would say the other thing is, in 1990, we made a decision to call everybody who's working at Kalmbach Feeds team members. And the word employee is absolutely a bad word. And I never forget when I first introduced this in 1990 to our team. And there was a guy who asked me the question, well, I don't know if we're a team. And I'll never forget the illustration I used. I said, last year, the Cincinnati Reds won their division. And everybody talked about what a great team they were. And this year, the Cincinnati Reds are in last place. And everybody's talking about what a lousy team they are. But no one's questioning whether they're a team. And we are absolutely positively a team. And the only question is how good of a team are we going to be? And we are team members. Business and human endeavor is absolutely, positively a team sport. It's always about the team. It's always about the fellow team members. And at Kalmbach Feeds, the way I describe it, it's just like a football team. You know, we have a customer service team. We got a transportation team. We got in the plants, we got first shift, second shift, third shift teams. And overall, it's like having the offensive team, the defensive team, the kickoff team, the punt return team, all these different teams. And we're all part of a big team. We are a team, and the only question is how good of a team we're going to be.
With sports, there's scouting, and whenever you're thinking of adding talent, there's a bunch of pre-work done on NFL rosters. I mean, there's a whole scouting division, right, of just trying to, in college football, trying to figure out the best team member to bring in. How much value and time has Kalmbach Feeds spent on trying to make sure you bring in the right talent into that team?
I can tell you that over and over again, we get told that our selection process, recruiting process, is the most intensive process they've ever been a part of. And what it typically involves, obviously it's different if we're hiring a truck driver. If we're hiring a truck driver, we give him a truck driving test before we hire him.
Sure.
We give everybody a real drug test because we're concerned about the people that we bring into our team.
Right.
And it's really all about treating our current team the way we'd want to be treated, because we don't want to bring in negativism. We don't want to bring in attitude problems. We don't want so we have a multiple interviews. We check references. We have drug tests. We have background checks. We have credit checks. Like, for example, if we're hiring a customer service representative or anybody that's not involved in production, we have a personality profile. It involves about 2 hours of the person's time and about $300 of our money.
Per person.
Wow. That we give to everybody that we're thinking about hiring. I won't do an interview without that profile.
Wow. So you do that profile before you even do an interview?
It depends upon, say, an office administrative position. We would probably do it before we offer them.
Yeah.
If it's somebody I'm going to interview, I want to have it for the interview.
Sure.
Because I want to use it in the interview.
Right.
So it just depends. So, you know.
That's no small number. I mean, like, you know, smaller businesses, I mean, there's $300 per applicant. But then the way you have to think about it, and I've talked to a lot of business owners, so correct me if I say something wrong here, but onboarding is expensive. And the time it takes to get an employee to where they're actually profitable helping the company, it could take 3 months, it could take 6 months to where they're actually good enough at their job. So it's the $300 expense in the grand scheme of worst case scenario, you hire for someone, they're gone in 6 months. You just paid them way more money than $300.
And I would.
So you're front loading the risk.
I would propose to you that your economic evaluation is dramatically understated, because not only do you have all the upfront costs, all the training costs, all the 6 months or 9 months costs. What about the opportunity cost? I mean, it's an astronomical number. I mean, I don't know if it's 100 to 1. The $300 is nothing. And you got to think about it right.
That's such a lesson, because it's so easy for us to live in the here and now. You're like, ooh, $300. That's a lot of money. And then not having the perspective of saying, actually, this hire, if I make the wrong decision, how many years back could this hire set my company? I mean, you're right. The opportunity cost of, like, if I would have hired someone better suited for the team, where would our team be at now?
Right. And I would even go so far to say, you know, culturally, there's a lot of cultural angst and anger and distrust of testing. And we're testing for a person's core personality traits for competency for the job and for what I would call a cultural match. So we're kind of tested for all sorts of things. And interesting to me, because I always tell somebody, you know, I'm an engineer, so I'm not sure I trust psychologists, but this profile is really, really good. And when we bring in new managers, you know, they're always distrusted. So I have to sell it over and over and over again. And the way I sell it is I said, look, first of all, we hired you, number one. Number two, you need to try it and learn the system and see how it works. And it's amazing the incredible success we've had, because our managers all appreciate the value it brings to the
Why do you think there's such a cultural distrust for personality tests and hiring?
I think it's because, you know, when you read the questions on the profile, most people, including myself, my brain doesn't say, how do they get this from here? You know, I never forget one of our children, all of our children have taken it.
Sure.
But on one of them in particular, I read the report to my wife, and she said, they nailed it. They nailed it. How did they do that? They nailed it. And, you know, it's interesting because it measures different characteristic traits, et cetera. And sometimes in an interview, I'll ask a guy, gal, you know, what they think about their, you know, are they an introvert or an extrovert? Okay, I'll ask them that. And the profile will have told me they're an introvert. And let's suppose that the applicant tells me, well, I'm an extrovert. What I always do is I look them in the eye and I say, what would your wife say? And when I'm looking them right in the eye, they know I'm reading them.
Yes.
And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, well, she'd say I'm an introvert. And agree with the profile.
Yeah, and then you're like, there you go. That's probably your answer.
And, you know, we always say it's 80% right 80% of the time. So it's not perfect.
Yeah, but it's helpful.
Yeah, 80% right 80% of the time.
We do something kind of similar to that through Aflac. It's not as detailed, but they have like birds that represent the different personality types. And that's actually been probably the most helpful thing in sales, actually. So, well, the way it works, you have like eagle, which is like type A, you know, dove, which is kind of like your love, your cares a lot, your owl, analytical, and then your parrot, talky, extroverted. The personality trait, you know, when you learn about those personality traits, you can generally, within a 5-minute conversation, pinpoint what characteristic that business owner is. And if you can figure out which characteristic, it's so much easier to do sales when you figure out their personality. And so that's been another layer of the personality test for my industry has been we do use it for hiring. So all my new agents, they go through and it helps me know, like, if they're analytical and they want numbers, me caring and giving them a hug, they're not going to care about that. They want cold, hard numbers. But then also using that as sales in like 3 minutes, I'm like, hey, you know what? I bet Paul Sr. is an eagle. At some capacity with maybe a little bit of owl as well. You know, that's kind of, so that if I know that about you, and that's what, it's going to be easier to hold a conversation that you're going to care about.
Well, the profile that we utilize was actually developed by a blind psychologist. And he owned the company for years and years and years. And he just passed away here recently. But he originally in the 50s developed this profile for New York Life to help them evaluate potential sales candidates. And then it evolved from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, if you're doing sales, listening to this podcast, being able to, because sometimes we're like, oh, psychology.
Right, exactly.
When you are willing though to actually like learn about people's personalities, it's so much easier. I can't tell you how many times I've closed a deal because I knew what would resonate with them. For you, I can tell you care for your staff, you care about your culture, you care about your team members. So if I come in here and I don't at all mention how it's going to benefit them and their families, you might not be as thrilled. Whereas maybe another business owner, he just cares about his bottom line. So if I'm talking about this is going to help your employees, this is going to be he's like, well, am I going to make money? And so knowing that about who you're selling to it can make the world of difference in sales, and something I'm learning and still trying to get better at. Well, I did want to ask you this. When you look back over your career, what is potentially some advice that maybe you wish you would have gotten when you started that you didn't have, that you've learned the hard way, that maybe you could, anyone looking to start a business, anyone maybe getting hired into a C-suite position, is there any advice that you'd give them that maybe you wish you would have had that you didn't, that you've learned over your career?
I told you that I had fantastic parents. And I remember my dad always said the 3 keys to success in business were persistence, and more persistence. We have an annual agribusiness conference. One year we had a 5-year series at one point in time. Now we're up to, I think, year 12 or 13 conference. But in those 5 years, we said, number one, you got to have a vision. In Proverbs, it tells us where there is no vision, the people perish. You got to have a vision, and you got to pursue that vision. Number 2, we said that you've got to execute on your vision, and you got to have a plan to execute on your vision. David had a vision, I would argue, to defeat Goliath, but he also had a plan on how to execute on it. He had a really good plan. And the third thing we said, you have to have persistence, and more persistence. And then the fourth thing we said was, you got to break through the barriers. You got to smash the walls. There's going to be times in our entrepreneurial journeys where there's going to be a really, really big wall. You've got to figure out how to smash through that, and people do that over and over and over again. I should go back to the persistence one. When we had our conference on persistence, we had a bunch of speakers, and one of those speakers was an astronaut who had applied 5 times to get into astronaut school, okay?
And didn't get it.
No, and got it the 5th time after he actually got him to change the rules for getting in.
Wow. Talk about persistence.
Persistence, more persistence. And the last thing we said is celebrate the victories. That would be a failure of mine. We haven't celebrated enough because we've had so many great victories. We need to celebrate more. I would say one other thing, we're all, if you're going to be in business, you got to be in sales. There may be some technical areas where you invent something that's so technologically superior you don't have to be, but most of us have to be in sales.
Yeah. And
my dad's advice for salespeople, to be successful, you got to be enthusiastic, and more enthusiastic.
I like his rules. They're very simple to follow.
They're really simple to follow. and I think about all the prospects and customers that we've had come to visit us. And the number one thing that they would tell us is, wow, you people are really enthusiastic about the feed business. And we are enthusiastic. Yeah. We get to serve great people. We get to have great customers. We're participating in feeding people. What better deal could you have?
I tell those people a lot when they give me calls, because I've been in sales for 6 years now, 7 years, 100% commission sales, and they ask me, hey, thinking about jumping into sales. What's what's some advice? And what I always say is, if you're not passionate about the product, don't sell it.
Right.
If you're not passionate about the product, don't sell it, because you can't fake it. And people can sniff bullcrap a mile away. They know when you're in it just to make some commission. If you believe in what you're selling, you don't have to lie. You don't have to try to round the. You just. A lot of times, for what I sell in Aflac, I have seen the blessing we have been to my policyholders. I can't speak for every Aflac agent out there. I know me and my team, we do it right, and we help a lot of people. And in 6 years, Aflac has never denied a claim wrongfully in 6 years of me being here. They've paid out every single claim they should have. And they've denied the ones that are like there was a pre-existing condition, like ones that were within their rounds too, but they've never been wrong. And so it's easy for me to be like, this is good stuff that I would encourage you to look into. And now there's Dave Ramsey could say it's a scam, don't buy it, whatever that. But like for me personally, like I am passionate about what we do because I believe in the company itself. So it's easy for me to talk to a business owner and say, hey, there's no reason we don't offer your staff this. Like, this is awesome stuff. If I represented a company that didn't pay their claims, they didn't do this, you can't, you're not going to be as successful.
And I've said I couldn't sell feed for any other feed company.
Yeah.
I mean, because I know them, and I'm not, and that may not be true. There may be some feed company I don't know about, but
generally speaking.
So we've got a great company. We've got great products. Great people, and everybody has a right. They want to treat other people the way they want to be treated, and that's great.
How? Two more questions, and we'll wrap up because I know it's football season, so we don't want to miss any of the football games coming on soon. Obviously, sales was a big part in growing the company. Culture was a big part in growing the company, getting to where it is today. Is there any specific thing that you can look back on that says, like, when we implemented this or when we figured this out or we did this, this is when the hyperbolic growth started for Kalmbach Feeds? Like, this is when we figured this part out. Well, this was the linchpin that when we pulled it, or we put it in place, it was game over.
One thing in transparency, I would tell you, when I came back to work for my dad, my dad put me on the road selling feed as soon as I got my driver's license at 16. Okay. And I went out on the road and, I had sold newspapers. I'd sold everything door to door. So it wasn't new to me. But, there's certain people that look down upon young people. There's some people that when they're in that position, they don't treat that young person the way they ought to. And in the sales field, I got some really harsh rejection. And so when I came back to work for my dad, I said, Dad, I'll do anything you want me to do, but I'm not going to sell. And what happened was about 6 months later, our only salesperson, when I came back to work for my dad, we had 17 team members, including my mom, my dad, and I.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. So when I came back to work for my dad, I said, I'll do anything but sell. 6 months later, our only salesperson quit to go to seminary to become a pastor.
You can't get mad at him for that. It's like, what are you going to say,
So you can't make it up, right?
Yeah, right.
He's 42 years old. You can't make it up.
Okay. Late pivot.
So then I was forced to go out on the road. And it's the best thing that ever could happen. Because what happened then is when you're in sales, what you do is, of course, you have to know your own products. And then you learn the needs of the customers, which you have to know.
Yeah.
It's all about how can you help them with their needs. And the third thing is you have to know the competition. And you're not going to learn it anyplace else. You're going to learn it on the front line. And so that's where I learned all that was probably be the best breakthrough because I needed to know all that if I was going to grow the company. And then I became the primary first salesperson. And then we started, then what happened was I failed a bunch of times hiring salespeople. Then my dad and I said, we're doing something wrong here. What are we doing wrong? We looked around in the agricultural space at successful organizations. And we brought in 2 different people to consult with us that had led successful organizations. And out of that, one of the things came this personality profile. And out of that also came a really good sales incentive plan that aligned our salespeople with our organization completely. And then we started hiring. We made a lot more better. Yeah. I mean, from that point forward, then we hired really successfully good people that are still with us today, 40 years later.
Wow.
So, I would say that, my having to go into sales or figuring out the sales side of it, the products were always great.
Well, I think the key lesson is the fact that you actually did the grunt work. Like you experienced the grunt work. You weren't a boss that pointed fingers and said, go do this, but you're like, no, I'm going to learn the system. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to be told no. And then it's easier to train that way. And it's easier to find the right people because you experience the hardship of sales and other parts of the company, right? Like you're willing to do the grunt work.
I would say in my situation, there was no choice.
Yes.
But
you did it though.
But in my son's situation, in Paul's situation, he would tell you one of his breakthroughs. He came back in 2015, and in 2015 we bought a plant in Pennsylvania that had no business. It was essentially bankrupt. It was still in business, but it was bankrupt with essentially no business. And one of the first things I did was I sent him out there to run it and turn it around, which is, you got to understand, here's this plant.
Bankrupt.
Here's this plant. You got to fix the plant. You got to fix the sales. You got to fix the people. You got to fix everything. And he got involved in the details of the plant. He got involved in the problems of the plant. He got involved in everything about the plant. So he really did the same thing I did, because I did all those things myself. And then he got involved in the sales, and that operation has been a fantastic operation. And we've got, it's just been a fantastic plant for us.
Yeah, I think the lessons, like just humility, right? Have being willing as a leader to not live in this. We were talking about pride before we started the podcast, right? And the dangers of pride and how it's the destroyer. But having the humility to just, do what's needed to be done.
Yeah, when people come to work at Kalmbach Feeds, if I get a chance to speak to them, I say that my job is to do everything I can to help them to be as successful as they can be. And I'm not going to ask anybody to do something that I haven't done or wouldn't do.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's easier said than done. Eventually, right?
It is, but it's interesting. I don't know if you know, but your dad and I both do daily devotionals for our children.
Yes. Well, I didn't know you did. I know
he does it because I did it.
Okay, cool. Nice. I love it.
And I was in Psalms 13 and 14 today. In 13, it's an incredible psalm because it talks about God's perspective of people. And God has over and over in his word expresses his concern for what I call the poor, the unfortunate, the childless, the left out, etc. And we need to have a vision. We need to have a worldview consistent with God's, not with the culture, because the culture is absolutely the opposite. And so if you have that God-consistent worldview of people, you got to have that.
I was just thinking about my dad's devotionals. It's a really great idea, and it's one of those things where I'm glad you're doing it too. And
it took me 6 years to get through the Bible. I go right directly through the Bible, and I'm on the second time around.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love it. And sometimes my dad's like, "Did you read it today?" I'm like, "No, I haven't yet. I'll get there." But even like sometimes I won't read it for a week, and then I'll go back and I'll just be able to skim through all of these just great thoughts from Dad. And I think those are going to mean more and more the older that I get and as life happens. So I'm glad that you're doing that for your kids. I think that I'm glad that my dad took after you to do the same thing, because we really appreciate it as well. I want to ask you one more question. I'm going to preface this. The world is not the same when your dad started Kalmbach Feeds.
The world's not the same.
And the pressure to meet DEI certification people and the pressure to hire people based on qualifications that might not fit your company's worldview or the people that you want to have in there. And then, like, how has Kalmbach Feeds navigated the culture shift of being like having to hire certain things, or being like that pressure of like, no, you need to have a diverse group of people and you need to do this, with also trying to hire the best talent that you possibly can, while also trying to navigate that woke push, if that makes sense.
First of all, I would say it is that, going back to my previous comments, God, He's not colorblind, and the color doesn't matter.
Right.
And the sex doesn't matter. And so we truly want to hire people that have the worldview that we have. And that is that truth matters. We have a lot of Paulisms at work. And one of them is results matter.
Yeah.
So results matter.
Yeah.
You got to get results. You know, it's just a fact of life.
Right.
I always have the joke, you know, that when I was coaching T-ball and you weren't allowed to keep score, the only people that didn't know what the score was were the parents.
Right. Right. Right.
The kids all knew.
Yeah.
So results do matter. And so it doesn't matter to us anything about what person. I mean, my dad grew up in inner city Philadelphia.
Right.
Doesn't matter. None of that matters. We care about the people and the results, and we're going to hire that way. I mean, we've got the largest private solar field that we know of in the area.
Wow.
Running 2 of our plants. Why is that? Well, the government was going to give away a bunch of money for this, and it made a lot of economic sense for us and our customers. So we're more than, I mean, it doesn't matter whether we agree with the rules or not. On the economic side, we're going to play by the rules. It doesn't matter on the social side whether we agree with the rules or not. So, you know, we're not going to have things in our healthcare plan that we don't think are right or that we think are wrong. And we're going to run our business according to, as much as possible, God's rules. And so we really haven't had any problem with doing it that way.
And I think that's just kind of what you want in America as a business owner, to run his business the way he sees that he should be running it.
Yeah, we because of where we live, we have a lot of Hispanic employees. Obviously, we have a lot of ladies in leadership. But to me, I even hate to say that because that's not the point.
The point is they were the best people
Right.
for that job, and they're getting results. And that's the end of and that's how it should be.
Right.
And the reason I asked you that question is I've talked to a lot of business owners that are, I live in Detroit. I live in Michigan. So in Michigan, there's a way bigger push to have, like, you know, X percentage of your team should be represented from this demographic of people. But they're like, well, I just want to hire the best people for my job. I don't care what they look like. But there's just kind of this like tension pull between, like, you have a business owner that just wants to hire the best person. They don't care. And then you have this organization come in and be like, nope, you gotta hire these people whether they're going to give you results or not, because you have to play the part that you're diverse and everything. And I've talked to a lot of business owners that are really struggling to kind of like balance that.
I think the
because it's like the PR play, so to speak.
There's a national association that's been started called Christian Employers Alliance, and that was one of the reasons I was in Oklahoma City with Hobby Lobby and David Green. But the concern that we have in America is in the banking side, in the internet side. Are they going to require us to do certain things in order to have certain services that they have monopolies on? And so, you know, we're working on ways that will be harder for them to force us to. You know, it's just like President Trump. You know, he had to start his own social network, Truth Social. But the amount of control that Facebook and Twitter had and Google has, and the amount that they're willing to utilize that control for evil is just unbelievable. They
just want more,
and they want to control it.
And that's where I got into an argument the other day with a business buddy, and I love this guy to death, like very respected, you know, guy and smart, really smart guy. But, you know, I said, man, he's like, well, it's not that bad yet, because we were talking back to the hiring thing I was telling you about. He's like, it's not that bad. I'm like, yet. But they want to control every aspect of our business. They want to tell us who we have to hire. They want to tell us how we need to spend our money. They want to tell us what we can post, what we can't post. I mean, you look at Europe right now. Like, there's a guy I follow that is in prison from a documentary he made on Parliament to show the corrupt. It was just a documentary. They put him in prison. Happening in Europe right now. And that is where some in America want America to get to, where the government just gets to control everything, and that's so anti-American dream. That's so anti what we stand for. And I think everyone, I joke, everyone has a brain. I joke, but like everyone, I'm like, the freedom for a business owner to act in the best interest of his business is something that is getting stepped on.
No question about it.
And so just asking you, I'm like, well, how are you dealing with that and trying to be proactive in that? My pastor knows of a buddy that lost his C-suite position because he wasn't willing to bend to the rules.
Or you have a lot. You have that happening in Marathon. You have that happening in Marathon and in corporate America. In fact, I would suggest that that's a great reason people ought to be thinking more about entrepreneurialism.
Right. Because
corporate America is, I would say, the Chamber of Commerce is woke. I mean, they're a disaster.
Yeah.
We are not a member.
Yeah, I'm not either anymore.
Because, and I've told them why. And they have a line of baloney they'd give you.
Yes.
Yeah. I've heard it several times.
Same thing. It's probably the same thing I hear too.
And so what we got to do, God gave us a brain.
Yeah.
He expects us to use it. One of the prayers that I have prayed over and over and over for years is, as I say, we have to work like it all depends upon us, and we have to pray because it all does depend upon God.
Yes.
But God gave us a brain. He expects us to use it, and we need to use our brains and energies to protect the freedoms we have.
Well, I appreciate you going down that rabbit hole with me, because it's a very big issue. And
Huge issue.
In the tagline to my podcast, I have real and authentic conversations with entrepreneurs. My goal is to ask questions that maybe other people are a little uncomfortable asking, but it's ones that everyone's thinking. And so that's why I wanted to kind of chat about it with you.
I'm on the board of the Center for Christian Virtue in Ohio, and I would call it the #1 lobbying organization for Christian values in the state, whether it be in the area of abortion or school choice or Christian businesses. And we have a statewide Christian Business Association that we've put together, and we're starting it and growing it because of these issues and others.
And I think the more, we were joking, I won't say the exact statement I said, but I think the more conservatives and believers can be bold in truth is what we need in this country. I'll kind of get a little vulnerable. I'll share this with you. And, I told you I started this podcast as a entrepreneur podcast. That's because that's all I knew as businesses. And the bigger we've grown, the bigger it's gotten, the people that I've met, it's turned into this like battle in my heart of like, I don't want to get political because some people are going to be mad at me. And my wife's like, can you not do political? I don't want somebody to come by and egg our house after something you say on the podcast. But the more that I've prayed through it, and the more I'm like, we need actually more sane people talking, not less sane people talking.
I agree.
We need more believers and people with good values speaking louder. And I think one of the reasons our country's gotten where we've gotten is we've been quiet. Not all of us, but a lot of conservatives and a lot of believers have just been like, we're just going to kind of do our job and be afraid and not been willing to be bold with truth. And so that's something I've been trying to do. I've been trying to ask those questions because I'm curious on how do you navigate that?
I don't know if you were probably not at church any longer, but a few years ago, I taught in the summer, we had a 4-week special topical Sunday school classes. And my subject was Jesus political? And I did 4 lessons on that. And I was so thankful that I had the opportunity to teach that lesson because I learned it so well. And it's like, what's the question? I mean, I would say half of what he said was political.
Yeah.
I mean, and what he said about the Pharisees, when you read it, today they would say, well, how could a Christian say such a thing?
Yeah, and they were the political leaders of that time.
I mean, it's like, this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Christians need to speak out.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for the ministry that you've had and even just my dad's friendship and the school that, I graduated from, just so many things that you've been bold and speaking truth. And so I appreciate that about you, Paul, and you've a great mentor, and I'm excited for Kalmbach. I'm excited for what's next. Do you have any exciting plans that you can announce? Like you're like, hey, we're trying to dabble in this, or is this all hush hush? No one knows what's next for Kalmbach.
We've got some really, really exciting plans that we haven't announced. But, when you grow 10% a year, it's always exciting.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for those to be announced. Those will be exciting. Maybe when those are all fleshed out, we can have a follow-up and you can tell us about those exciting things. I want to thank you again for coming on the show. As long as I've known you, I haven't known the story of Kalmbach Feeds. And so I appreciate you sharing that. This is great. I feel like we could talk for another hour. I want to be cognizant of our time. And so thank you for everything. And if there's anything else that you want to leave the listeners with or any final thoughts, I'll kind of give that to you.
No, I don't. It's been a lot of fun.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Paul. Guys, please, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, you can follow us. And if you are needing feed.
Right. Kalmbach, we got
Kalmbach
the best
Feeds.
products.
Do you have a dog food line, or is that what you're kind of doing?
We sell companion animal feeds for everything except dog and cats.
There you go.
And just if you don't know where to buy it, get it on our website or just go to chewies.com.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. See you in the next episode.